Did your muscles ache? My muscles always ache. I'm 44. But yeah, no. But the treatment is the same. Lie down and drink lots of fluids. There is nothing to be gained from telling someone they don't have the flu other than feeling smug.
Right, and what you want is a bit of sympathy.
That's right.
And preferably a hot drink.
That's right.
With something in it. Is that too much to ask?
Hot squash, Lemsip, other brands are available.
Yeah, a little bit of something in there too. What do you think of all this?
I hope you're feeling okay now,
I'm feeling
Mikey.
fine
There
now.
you go. That wasn't hard, was it?
It wasn't hard. Okay, I'm going to rail against Meghan Markle in my thought for the day. She's got this new documentary series out where she teaches us awfully important things like how to cut up a banana, how to lay out gorgeous scones and a gorgeous dinner place setting over kind of gorgeous looking crockery. But I remember when Meghan Markle first launched herself over here, and she was all meant to be about female empowerment, politics, and she's gone all trad wife. And I just think it's really naff, and I'm not into it. And also, if I want to watch someone pour sugar seductively into scones, like, I want that to be Nigella Lawson. I don't want that to be Meghan Markle. So I'm just not into it. That's not because I've got a vendetta. I just think it's really anti-feminist. Like, actually, probably one of the most grotesquely anti-feminist things I've seen someone with all that wealth and power do. So, Meghan, I don't think that's really one for the sisterhood.
Okay, there you go. Are you listening, Meghan? Or should I say Your Grace? Hopefully that has truly sunk home. Now, as I'm speaking, I'm looking up at the news feed in front of me in the studio, and I can see the podium in the briefing room in the White House. We're going to be hearing, I believe, maybe quite soon, from the spokesman for Donald Trump. And when we do that, we're going to cross over there, because you'd imagine there'll be stuff there that we really do want to hear. The briefing is a weekly event, pretty regular, and I expect the spokesman or spokeswoman is going to be talking about domestic matters. There's always a lot there to talk about, but on the day that we see Donald Trump cutting the supply of intelligence to Ukraine with some kind of effect, on the battlefield for Ukrainians fighting for their lives against the Russian invader, you'd imagine that will come up there. There's been a good deal of blowback around the world. I mean, in this country, I've been talking to a lot of people on the show around Europe, and we're going to be hearing, Macron, President Macron of France, is planning to speak a bit later on, hopefully plug into that too. Now, let's just catch up on where we were. This stop on intelligence to Ukraine. I spoke earlier on to Larissa Brown, who's the Times defence editor, and she discussed the impact on the battlefield.
It's quite crucial for quite a lot of the systems. I mean, one thing is that US intelligence helps the Ukrainians know that Russian missiles and drones are headed their way. So in order for them to be able to respond effectively and quickly, they rely on US intelligence. And this is intelligence that's gathered from satellites and also other sophisticated American kit. And then there's also the ability to strike, deep behind enemy lines, as so to speak. And that is also reliant on US targeting data, intelligence that shows where Russian positions are. So without all of that, they can't be exactly certain where some of these key targets are. And therefore, that increases the risk of miscalculation, hitting the wrong targets and collateral damage, as one analyst has described it to me.
So that's Larissa Brown of the Times. I also had the pleasure of seeing Kira Rudik in person in the studio, someone I speak to quite a lot on Times Radio. Here she was in the studio, and Kira Rudik is someone who knows a lot about this. Kira Rudik, a Ukrainian MP, is someone who sees the war in Ukraine up close and personal every day of her life, and she gave me her reaction.
It is obviously brutal, and I cannot imagine how many people will pay the ultimate price for the decision. It's also not quite clear why it happened today. So the sequence of events was that yesterday the United States, or 1 day ago, they pulled off the aid. Then President Zelensky sent a letter, and President Trump mentioned this letter at his address to the nation. And then it seemed that the situation warmed up, right? And then today in the morning, we hear that there is a pull on the intelligence data. So I wonder if it was a plan altogether and it was just in motion, right, to pull all the support. And still, I cannot understand why in this war the United States are putting pressure on Ukraine and not on Russia.
Kira Rudik there. And just a short while ago, I spoke to Jim Townsend, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for Europe and NATO, and he discussed with me how the Kremlin would be reading all of this.
Well, it's amazing. You know, that's another part that's just baffling, is how Trump is just falling in line behind Putin. Even in Moscow, they can't believe it. I'm sure they think there's some plot there. But doing this in public, not just in the Oval Office, but every day there's a public statement. Even during the address to Congress yesterday, he was waving around the idea of the letter that had just arrived. That's just no way to do it, number one. And number two, it makes us look so brutal in terms of how this country is approaching this problem. It's just something that is something that's it's shameful for a lot of Americans to watch unfold.
Jim Townsend there, a former big hitter at the Pentagon in Washington. And then I spoke to Charles Kupchan, who's a senior director for European affairs on the National Security Council. That was in the Obama and Clinton periods. And we talked about the impact of America barring Britain from giving Ukraine American intelligence.
Does Britain have its own sources and methods? Yes. Does Britain have the satellite capabilities? Does it have the intercept capabilities and electronic equipment that the United States has? No. So the bottom line here is, if this cutoff of U.S. intelligence lasts a long time, it will definitely take a toll on Ukrainian operations. Exactly how far the ban has gone, I don't know. It may just have to do with long-range strikes on Russian territory. We may still be providing battlefield awareness about Russian troop movements on the front line. I just don't think we know the details. But the more that's withheld, the more the damage to Ukrainians' forces and operations.
That's Charles Kupchan there, formerly of the U.S. National Security Council. So Kate Ferguson and Mikey Smith, just tell me your thoughts and your feelings, as it were, about all of this. That it maybe soon, maybe within days, that the tap will be turned back on when it comes to intelligence and arms supplies to Ukraine from America. Maybe we will see. As things stand, though, and when you heard this news, Kate, how did you feel? What do you think?
I mean, it is astonishing because they are so reliant on that American military intelligence. And this was one of the things that we'd heard people in Downing Street in the UK government say would be a terrible thing if it happened. We'd heard this floated the last few days, well, they need to not turn those taps off too.
Yeah, they sort of dreaded it.
They dreaded it. They said, it's one thing talking about military kit, but they must not turn the tap off to intelligence. I heard your last speaker. I had seen reports, I think in the Times maybe, about that they have just turned it all off, all this intelligence. So that's not just saying we won't give you the intelligence to strike in Russia, but we won't give you defensive intelligence to defend your own borders. It's very hard to think anything other that they're trying to kind of nobble Zelensky on the eve of making him sign over this stuff. So, it just feels like each day they're kind of moving the ground from under his feet. And I am very surprised because last night we had that Donald Trump address to Congress, that long address where he was talking about the letter Zelensky had sent him, his willingness to sign the minerals deal. Zelensky had tweeted a lot of that as well. We had heard a report coming out earlier today from France that it may even be that Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron go with Zelensky to sign that deal next week. So it felt like they were inching back. This peace process was coming back, inching back into frame, and this sets the whole thing back again. But it's just so, you ask me how I feel, it's just so sad because there's not, what can Ukraine do? What can they do when they're cut off like this?
That is the question. Because now we have the reports that when the next gathering round the piece of paper with a pen happens, the terms are going to be even tougher than they were last time. The paper on the table last Friday, when there was that awful bust-up, which we remember pretty vividly, that paper's no longer on the table. Next time they're going to be seeking tougher, bigger terms. What about you, Mikey? What were you thinking?
So I'd be interested to see what the sequence of events was and when the intelligence tap was actually turned off, whether that was before or after Zelensky's message came through. Because everything I've seen, as Kate was saying, since Zelensky's message went through yesterday evening has been relatively sort of friendly from the US relatively constructive, looking for a way forward. This doesn't seem to fit in with that. So I wonder if this happened earlier in the day and we're just hearing about it now. If that is the case, I would imagine that it will be remedied fairly shortly.
Although, even if that was so, the fact that it happened at all, Mikey.
Absolutely unprecedented, I think, in this sort of situation. The thing that was starkest for me was when you look at them turning sort of the taps off on military funding. So, bullets and bombs, literally, they're not coming. You can stockpile that, and they could have lasted for, maybe a few months without that funding coming before things ran out. This is something that affects them now, immediately, and that is a strong decision to take to try and, as you say, nobble someone back to the table.
Okay, still watching that podium at the White House. We will go there and keep you right in the loop with all of that here on Pienaar and Friends in association with NatWest Cushion, making workplace pensions and savings easy. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more.
This is what a
use. John Pienaar on Times Radio Drive with NatWest Cushion, putting your employees in control of their financial future. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more.
And here with us on Pienaar and Friends, Mikey Smith from the Mirror and Kate Ferguson from the Sun on Sunday. We're watching the podium at the White House when it'll be Caroline Leavitt who gives that briefing at some point before too long. We'll cross there and get it for you live as soon as that gets going. Kate and Mikey, you were saying, Kate, a moment ago that this was something which in Downing Street they sort of dreaded, the idea that they didn't like the cut-off of arms supplies to Ukraine, but then they really dreaded the idea of intelligence coming on top, and now it has. And you've got the Prime Minister still, it seems, determined to do that bridging role, and reach out to both sides, not going to join any slanging off of Donald Trump. But Kate, that's going to get harder, not easier.
I think that's a very hard job for the PM to do. But I want to be really clear. I think that's the job he has to do. I totally back Keir Starmer and what he's done so far. I think he was... I mean, people can be a bit kind of snotty about it now, given recent events. But I think it was artful the way that he schmoozed and charmed Donald Trump in the White House on his visit. You do need to do that. The best hope Ukraine have now, and the reality is that you need to try and salvage what you can from that American relationship, because you know what, it's about more than outrage or hurt feelings or whatever language you want to use. The reality is that they're so entwined in the defence of this country that, as we see today, like as soon as they pull the drawbridge up, the consequences are just so horrific and big that you just have to swallow those concerns, and sort of that's the PM's job. He's diplomat in chief. Now we can be more forthright. The country is very clear about our country has been very clear about the support it gives to Ukraine. So Keir Starmer may at some points look out of step with opinion on that.
Yes.
But I think that he's doing totally the right thing because that's the art of politics. It's difficult.
I totally get the argument, but it's not going to get any easier. And any more developments like this. I mean, take today in the House of Commons, we had Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats, pretty much again pushing him to take a side and speak out much more plainly. And you can imagine with stories like this today, where we're talking about Ukrainian soldiers' lives being put directly in greater peril, the feeling in the country that, look, someone's got to say something more about Donald Trump. It's going to be stronger, not weaker, isn't it?
I think the feeling in number 10 is that there's some road to go before
you get to that.
Yeah. I think there's still hope at this point. I think there may be a cut-off for that, where it doesn't seem like they're going to get Zelensky and Trump back to the table. It doesn't look like this deal's going to go through, and it looks like Donald Trump's going to go off and side with Putin. Yeah. That is a scenario that surely someone has gamed out. Yeah. We're not there yet. I think a lot of people have been quite surprised at how good an international statesman Keir Starmer is. Myself included. I don't mind saying I'm one of those people who was maybe a little sniffy about it previously. But he did exactly what he set out to do when he was over there, sort of tail end of last week. He set up as well as he could the sort of stage for what could have happened immediately next, and then events took their journey. But yeah, no, I think Keir Starmer is doing exactly what he's setting out to do very well.
I think what I was just going to say, the other thing that I thought Keir did well over the weekend, because obviously as a Sunday reporter I cover Saturdays, and that was when we had the Zelensky visit, and PM hugged him so close. I mean, quite literally, he gave him a bear hug as he walked down Downing Street, and he pointed out the crowds that had lined Whitehall cheering for Zelensky, people waving their placards and flags. So PM has made a very clear demonstration, I think, of our solidarity with Ukraine, which I think is crucial. And he just has to tread this very, I mean, it's a bit naff calling it a tightrope because everyone else is calling it that, but high wire, whatever. And I guess we'll see where events take us. But I think that is crucial for him to be seen to be side by side with Zelensky.
I guess it is also helpful. I mean, that sort of bear hug returned by Zelensky, it helps that Starmer and Britain, I'll come on to France and others in a moment, but it helps that they are just unambiguously seen as friends of Ukraine, that they are seen as doing a job that needs to be done. And as far as the wider picture is concerned, there will be those who say, look, they want to see another cliche, another Love Actually moment where the Prime Minister, lashes out at Starmer, gets some cheers in the street for doing that. But he doesn't have to do that, to be very clear that he knows right from wrong and that he means to do the right thing, when it comes to Ukraine.
I think there was a sort of another point of that in PMQs today. Right at the top of PMQs, Keir Starmer had some words to say about British troops, British service personnel who served in Afghanistan, and that was, of course, number 10 didn't confirm this, but that was quite clearly aimed at JD Vance, who the night before had been, some would say, slightly sniffy about Britain's involvement.
Just remind us, what do you
So he said something about a random country
no, that was
offering...
JD Vance, but what was Starmer's
I forget the exact... he was marking the anniversaries of some deaths of service personnel in Afghanistan, but they were unusual. I think one of them was the 18th anniversary. So, it was clear that...
He was paying tribute to our fallen heroes the day after the Deputy President.
Exactly. But this wasn't something he would have said today. And you don't mark the 18th anniversary at PMQs. That's not a thing you do. But it was clearly a little bit of a swipe at JD Vance.
Well, we're going to break away in a moment because Carolyn Levitt, the White House spokesperson, is now beginning her briefing. But of course, they're in just a moment. Also helpful, Kate and Mikey, that you see Macron and Starmer, cooperating side by side. We're so used to that being a relationship of rivalry. I mean, so often we have seen in past years and distant years, the French just so keen to get one over on the British, and no doubt the other way round too, and competing to be the preeminent voice when it comes to the voice of Europe. Now they're happy to sort of share that burden.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's quite nice. I mean, look, Macron is a bit of a little Napoleon, isn't he? And it's probably taken him an awful lot to swallow all that and work with someone else. Macron's what, in his last year of... Where are we? In his last year of president?
Well, yeah, it doesn't look good for him.
Doesn't look good for me. No, I mean, it's a foregone conclusion, doesn't it? So, I mean, he has to. But yes, look, I think it's good that working relationship's obviously well, that they've both got a good working relationship with Trump. And really, the more the better, right? You need to show that Europe are upping their defence spending, are willing to step up in this peace plan. And also, these are two men who both seem to get on okay with Donald Trump, have his ear, have gone out of their way to charm him. So it makes sense, but it's good that we see that.
Yeah, Mikey.
I think almost exactly the same. He's probably coming to the end of his time as in his role, and I think he recognises the moment. This is not a time for petty rivalries.
Yeah, it's a history books moment.
Yeah.
That's true. I think all men involved recognise their time in history, their moment in history.
What was that Tony Blair phrase? I feel the hand of history on my shoulder.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, do you get any word on when we're going to see, Zelensky within days, I think, and maybe those two leaders, Macron and Starmer, alongside, when that may actually happen? Is that anywhere near to being firmed up? We're talking about a few days, aren't we?
Yeah, I think that was a report that came out of France. I think the AFP wire snapped it. It seems that Number 10 are downplaying that. But to be honest, it makes sense. I remember talking to a colleague yesterday and I said, you can't imagine them letting Zelensky go alone. I would have assumed that it would be one that Keir and Macron did with him. And it feels like the minerals deal, well, it certainly felt this morning like the minerals deal was on the edge of, being okayed. So I assumed it was going to be next weekend.
But whatever it looks like now.
Who knows? It's day by day, isn't it, this story? But I assumed that was going to be a kind of next Monday trip, but no confirmation at all.
Yeah, so we'll see what the new deal, assuming there is a new deal, looks like, and just where into that fits some kind of American guarantee of security for a multinational force to guard the peace, the ceasefire, rather, in Ukraine, when and if it comes. Will there be any advance on all of that? Because since the last bust-up, there's now a new plan put together by Macron, by Keir Starmer and others for a truce. What is it, a month-long truce, which has been embraced by Zelensky as an idea, which would mean, the fighting would go on the ground, but it would stop in the air, it would stop at sea. And that'll be part of the conversation too. We'll see whether Donald Trump moves to embrace it. And if he does, what about Putin? We just don't hear anything from Putin about what he's going to do, which is a massive question, of course, huge question in the background.
Yeah, I mean, does Trump kind of just package up? Does Putin agree to stop shelling, stop sending drones in, to stop fighting? So does he agree to a truce or a ceasefire or whatever you want to call it? And is that the only win Trump gets from him, right? Is the end of shelling for however finite amount of time, is that seen as his great peace plan? Is there any more? But we've heard nothing from Putin. The person that's tweeting merrily at the moment is Medvedev, the old president before Putin snatched it back, obviously. Yeah. But I mean, I think really if Zelensky signing up to this peace deal, the minerals plan, and you have all of Europe pretty much now bit by bit saying they're going to raise defence spending, and Britain and France have come forward with this more thrashed out peacekeeping plan. Yeah. And that's what Trump has said he wanted. Well, he feels what was the phrase there? The hand of history on his shoulder. He wants to be the peacemaker. As he said repeatedly, he wants to stop the killing. So it's kind of now that's his moment to get Putin to do it too. Yeah. And then that will be a big test.
Your thoughts are coming in. Let's sort of share a few of those now. Keen to hear what you're thinking, of course. I mean, tonight especially, but always. So this is in from Scott. Thanks for writing, Scott. He says, Trump's second coming is truly terrifying. I try to convince myself his actions are part of a really clever plan that he'll share with us at some point. In reality, I fear, says Scott, that he's a narcissistic fool and a danger to world peace. And this has come in. It's a voice note from Mike. Let's have a listen to that.
Ukraine's big mistake was surrendering their nuclear weapons and believing that we would defend them.
Mike's thought there. Add yours to Mike's. And this is in from Will. He says, do you think it's possible for King Charles to host Trump on a state visit while he's waging a trade war against Canada, for whom King Charles is head of state? That's a question from Will. And this is in from Catherine. Mikey, she says, I believe you. Husband, toddler, and I had it over half-term, and it was utterly rotten. Talking about Mikey's flu, the 5-year-old had to look after us. Huge sympathies, buddy. That is from Catherine.
Thank you.
Mikey is saying thank you and smiling appreciatively. Look, very soon we're going to be going to the White House and hearing what the spokesman there has to say. We're going to be hearing from Kate Borsey, who will tell us what happens on her show. Takes over at 7 o'clock. Now, though, at 6:30, let's get the news with Laura Cook.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Good evening. President Zelensky's top aide says American and Ukrainian teams have agreed to meet again in the near future. Earlier, the US cut off intelligence sharing with Kyiv after last week's row with Donald Trump. Just 2 days ago, military aid was suspended. But Donald Trump's national security advisor, Mike Waltz, says things are starting to look more positive.
Just got off the phone before I walked out here with my counterpart. We are having good talks on a location for the next round of negotiations, on delegations, on substance. So I think we're going to see movement in very short order.
It's understood the UK and France are refining a peace plan to present to the US in the next few days. A judge has told a Chinese PhD student he faces a very long jail term when he's sentenced for drugging and raping 10 women. Authorities believe his final victim total could be 5 times that. Zhen Haozhou met women on social media before spiking their drinks and attacking them, often filming it on hidden cameras. The Governor of the Bank of England has been answering questions from MPs about potential changes to US trade policy and new tariffs. Andrew Bailey told them there's a major shift going on across the Atlantic. And Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davies asked the Prime Minister to push for the extradition of Andrew and Tristan Tate to Britain from the US. The controversial influencers who are under criminal investigations in 3 countries deny wrongdoing. And the weekend's Brit Awards ceremony on television led to 825 complaints. Most were about Sabrina Carpenter's racy opening performance. And for a roundup of news on demand, subscribe to the Times News Briefing on any podcast platform.
This is Times.
About their pension. Search NatWest Cushion today. Capital at risk.
And here with me on Pienaar and Friends, Mikey Smith from the Mirror, Kate Ferguson from the Sun on Sunday, and Kate Borsey, who can tell us now about what to expect when she takes over at 7. Hello, Kate.
Yeah, John, we'll dive into intelligence sharing. The US halting its intelligence sharing with Ukraine. There are reports that the UK will wade, or is being made to weigh into this as well. We'll dig into that with Pauline Neville-Jones, former chair of the UK's Joint Intelligence Committee. The extension to that really is, and this is being written about out by Larissa Brown, the defence editor. I know who's been on your show, John. She writes a piece in tomorrow's Times that we'll have an exclusive look at about what potential nervousness over the US and their pro-Putin stance may lead to in terms of Trident. There are some exclusive insight into the UK and US's relationship over Trident. It's a joint thing, of course. And what happened when that missile misfired and plopped into the sea off the coast of Florida. Do you remember that after last January? So some good stuff from that we'll hear about from Larissa Brown there in our look inside tomorrow's paper that really gets you thinking about the wider ramifications of what we're hearing from Donald Trump and what that means for the UK's own security as well.
Trident, of course, it is our independent strategic nuclear deterrent. It's mounted on some 4 Trident submarines. They're taken in turns to go on patrol. But it's also dependent on US technological support.
Yeah.
And if it's as it seems, there are concerns in the Ministry of Defence, the Royal Navy, that support might not necessarily be reliable.
Yeah.
Well, again, my God, what a question.
Yeah. It is a huge question. There's plenty of expert opinion on this from defence industry analysts and beyond. I can't go too much into it, but it really does make for some interesting listening. That'll come at about 10 to 9 on the show tonight. Adam Bolton joins us. It's the return of Bolton's back half, and we're joined by John Hutton, the former Labour Defence Secretary. We'll actually dig into cuts to welfare spending to accommodate defence spending. John Hutton, also the former Work and Pensions Secretary as well. Scott Galloway joins us. We're going to talk a little bit about the Congress address by Donald Trump last night and about the reaction of Democrats and whether it was just a bit rubbish, whether it fell flat, their paddles and their signs and their sort of slow clapping, but only a few of them. And really the fact that the Democrats need to catch up quick if they're going to be a proper opposition. And I'll ask Scott Galloway, who is pro-Dem and anti-Trump, why they haven't done that yet. He's quite vocal on that.
All right, Kate, look forward to that. You are with us from 7 here on Times Radio. Now, I mentioned earlier on, here on Pienaar and Friends, Mikey Smith and Kate Ferguson here with us, and of course you are there, which is always good to know that President Macron of France is going to be speaking a little bit later on in about, well, sometime in maybe half an hour's time. Another big moment in a packed news day. Nina de Santos, one of our favourite European commentators, is on the line to give us a few insights. Hello to you, Nina.
Hi there, John.
Nina, what about this speech from Macron? Can you give us an idea of what's now being expected?
Well, we don't really know. All he's said is that he wants to address the nation in this, quote, great moment of uncertainty. He put that out on a tweet or an X comment on that social media site, of course, owned by Elon Musk. It's not infrequent for French presidents, particularly domestic lame duck French presidents like Emmanuel Macron essentially is, after losing his majority and then having that ill-fated election last year. To have these big addresses, televised addresses to the nation in moments like this, it's likely that he's probably going to address the concerns surrounding Europe's security after Donald Trump's radical change of policy on Ukraine in just the last week or so, and also the threat of those double-digit trade tariffs that could pummel France as the second biggest economy inside Europe as well. It's likely those are going to be the issues on the debate, if you like.
Right, and when we hear that Emmanuel Macron is keen to make another trip to Washington, this time in partnership with Keir Starmer, possibly with Emmanuel Macron there as well, on his way to sign. We shall see, maybe have something of a bust-up. We'll see whether it's any better this time than last time, but all travelling together, which says a lot about those relationships, Nina, doesn't it?
Yeah, this was hinted at by Macron's spokeswoman as she addressed the media, and then the Élysée Palace made it clear that they as yet didn't actually have anything on the agenda to do something like that. But obviously we saw a furious amount of shuttle diplomacy taking place between Paris, London and Washington, D.C. with, as you said, Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron sort of trying to tee up the groundwork for some kind of peace deal, with Zelensky arriving in Washington, D.C. on Friday for that fateful meeting that ended with such onerous language and bad terms. Can it be brushed over with Zelensky still in charge in Ukraine? That is the big question, and it's not clear at this moment. In the meantime, what Emmanuel Macron does have on the cards is he's been having a meeting with Viktor Orban of Hungary in Paris today. He's a leader who is one of the most difficult in EU circles to deal with in terms of putting on a united show of support for Ukraine, because Hungary is one of those Eastern European countries like Slovakia that sails quite close to the Kremlin's winds. But then there's an EU summit coming up in just a few days' time, where these EU leaders are going to start to have to talk about putting money behind these big plans for defence. You know, John, the irony about the situation we find ourselves in is that Emmanuel Macron has made 2 big speeches since 2017 and another one last year at the Sorbonne University, essentially telling Europe they had to wake up for a moment like this, that NATO could find itself being undermined by one of its biggest members, and also that Europe could get pummeled on trade and would have a very different relationship with the United States in a few years' time.
Okay, these are big topics. I want to come back to some of that. I'm going to cross now just to the White House, because the coming meeting, the next meeting between President Zelensky and Donald Trump, that's come up as part of the conversation in the White House West Wing, and in particular focusing on that row, which just seemed, I don't know, inordinately out of proportion over what President Zelensky chose to wear when he met Donald Trump. He wore, as he always does, what looked like sort of battle fatigues almost, a sweatshirt, trousers and boots. It's solidarity with the troops, but he was picked out for that by J.D. Vance, the vice president, and then we heard him accused of being disrespectful to the office of the president. Well, that's come up in the briefing with Catherine Levitt. Let's just have a listen in.
That Zelensky showed up last week without a suit for his meeting in the Oval Office. But Elon Musk never wears a suit.
He did last night.
So what is the dress code?
Well, Elon Musk wore a suit last night. I'm sure you saw it.
Was he spooked by the Zelensky getting kicked out?
No, I don't think so. I'm just pointing out that he did wear a suit last night, and I think the president liked that very much, and he looked great. Speaking of the president, he just passed me a note while I'm standing here. He wanted me to hold this up. This is the poll that I cited, the CBS YouGov poll that shows that 76% of those who watched the president's speech last night approved of his speech. And so it goes to my earlier point that I made in my monologue about how incredibly sad it is that we have a modern-day Democrat Party who is so severely out of touch with the American public. This is a great poll. The ultimate poll, though, came on November 5th when the president won by an overwhelming margin that he spoke about last night. Democrats weren't happy to hear that either. Ouija.
Thank you, Caroline. Back on tariffs. Last night, President Trump said there will be a little disturbance.
I'm going to pull away now from that news conference. We're watching it for more developments. Whether you heard, in its own way, revealing stuff or maybe confirmatory stuff. The president apparently highly chuffed by some polling after that address to both houses of Congress last night, a poll which shows majority approval for that. Not just pleased, he apparently gave it to his spokesperson to wave in front of the cameras in the briefing room. And just so extraordinary that what Zelensky wore in the Oval Office last week is such a matter of debate. And in its own way, Kate and Mikey, that is revealing in itself, isn't it?
Oh, it was horrible, that exchange, wasn't it? Like, in the Oval Office. It was such a kind of mean punching down question from that man, designed, it felt, to bait Zelensky, and it was just so sad and horrible to watch, really. I don't think anyone that I knew wanted to watch that or knew where to look, really. It was horrible. But I mean, as that questioner does point out, Elon Musk always roams around in a T-shirt in the Oval Office, so it's not unheard of. Yeah. But he was looking rather uncomfortable, I thought, in his suit and tie yesterday. Yeah.
The talk about the sweatshirt and trousers, it was just such a distraction, and surely that was the point.
Yeah, I mean, that was the point. The point of asking the question is not, you're not smart enough to be in a place among adults. That's not what the question was. It's, why didn't you think that you had to supplicate yourself more than you have? Why aren't you grovelling more? Why? That was J.D. Vance's whole thing. Why aren't you saying thank you? This wasn't about conforming with the norms of diplomacy. This was how much can you humiliate yourself in front of Donald Trump, and how much do you want it? And that I think, is making everyone increasingly uncomfortable.
Yeah, it would be somehow disappointing to see President Zelensky, next time he turns up, maybe within days, wearing anything different to the last time.
Oh, God, I hadn't even thought about that. Sorry, John, I literally hadn't thought about that. If he turns up, what he'll have to wear.
You can't imagine that he would, though.
He can't, can he? But you just think, anyway. Sorry, I hadn't even really thought about that.
No,
What a ridiculous thing to think about.
Ludicrous conversation. But he met the King, King Charles II, His Majesty, in his palace, wearing the same stuff, and the King seemed perfectly happy to greet him that way.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out that the King only meets who he wants to meet. That was a pointed invite, I think.
Okay, well, that's more to talk about. We're going to be talking more about what's going to go on in Europe, and I want to get your thoughts on what's going on at Westminster on the party political level. Some interesting dynamics there, just to share your thoughts on. You're listening to Pienaar and Friends here on Times Radio in association with NatWest. And here with me on Pienaar and Friends, Kate Ferguson from The Sun on Sunday and Mikey Smith from the Mirror. Just want to just get your thoughts briefly before we move on and talk about tomorrow's European Council. That is the meeting of European EU heads. And it's a meeting in which Keir Starmer seems to be getting back into the habit of turning up at. He's invited again to give his thoughts with the defence of Europe in the face of Russian aggression, absolutely smack in the middle of the menu, and it's becoming a regular thing. And it's interesting that he is there again. He's welcomed there again. They're all going to be, well, talking along together.
Yeah, I think it's funny, isn't it? This defence, obviously it's really focused minds, and like it or not, Britain leads Europe as a continent in terms of defence. So we've got Trident. Something I only learned a few weeks ago when Grant Shapps wrote for us, which is we obviously offer Trident, we provide coverage for all of Europe with Trident nuclear deterrent. But France keeps theirs to themselves. Yes. They're obviously talking now about sharing it, but I had no idea until 3 weeks ago that France doesn't share theirs. So, he needs to be part of that conversation. I think he's seen as quite a rallying figure in this area, and it sort of puts those rows about Brexit and trade and this and that slightly to the side, doesn't it, as we focus on defence. I think whatever happens, it's clear that Europe is going to have to ramp up its defence spending over the next few years. And they're talking about how you disentangle from America, because that takes, I think someone said 5 to 10 years. Now, Trump presidency has another, 4 years to run. But France could run and win the next time. So you do need to be looking at how you're going to not just beef up Europe's defence, but disentangle, make it self-reliant.
Yeah, I mean, the next German leader, Friedrich Merz, he's talking very much about that. He wants to see the French and the British nuclear umbrellas extended over Germany, beyond the point that it's there already. I mean, pretty much all intents and purposes, Germany's protected by the nuclear umbrella. But as you say, Kate, France isn't part of the NATO set up where that's concerned. And we're talking about countries maybe thinking more in terms of their own positions and their own allies within the alliance, and that's interesting too. But Friedrich is pushing the line when it comes to being critical of Donald Trump. That's for sure. We can go back now, I think, to the White House and listen to more of those questions to Caroline Levitt.
Ratcliffe said today that the president has paused also intelligence sharing with Ukraine. Is that temporary or is that permanent?
I believe what the National Security Council told me in regards to that was that they paused or they are reconsidering the funding for Ukraine, as you saw, the pause on the funding. As for intelligence matters, I would refer you to either the National Security Council or the CIA as well.
But they're considering lifting or reinstating the military aid going to Ukraine, which they paused this
Again,
week.
it's a pause for a review.
Follow up on that.
Sure.
The president read parts of the letter that he received last night from President Zelensky. Can you give us a sense of when President Trump now plans to sign that minerals deal after receiving that letter?
Those talks are happening as we speak. I just saw the National Security Advisor. He's working very hard on it. I believe he was going into the Oval Office to give the president an update on where this stands. But again, the president is committed to a peace deal. He wants to see this war end. And I think that President Zelensky's message, which he also shared on X as well, is a positive sign in the right direction.
The president also said that the United States was reclaiming the Panama Canal. The president of Panama this morning, or at some point today, said that President Trump was lying. Wanted to get your response to that, and also curious if the president had a reason for.
Okay, we're going to put away there, but we heard that exchange on Ukraine. We heard Caroline Levitt being pressed on the withdrawal of intelligence cover for Ukraine. They've been denied access to American intelligence on the battlefield. Caroline Levitt, though, did not want to go there. She referred the press to the CIA and to the National Security Council, but she didn't have to confirm it because we heard earlier on in the day from the head of the CIA himself a confirmation that was indeed the case. And then it went on to the question of trying to just bring this pause, this phase of the acrimony to an end with the contracts of American access to Ukrainian minerals maybe being signed sometime soon. And the message there, guys, was at least somewhat encouraging, wasn't it, as far as it went?
Yeah, I mean, not much information there at all. It's interesting, these press conferences that you see in America, because you think if that was in the UK, all the questions would be on Ukraine. But, you know, it's like just sandwiched between all these other bits, one or two questions. Meanwhile, all of Europe is sort of like holding our breath, waiting to see what she might tell us. It does feel like this intense diplomacy that's been going on with this minerals deal, that will get signed. It feels like that will get signed. Also, Keir seems to be speaking to Trump and Zelensky basically every night at the moment. So it is really. We don't get They don't like doing the readouts of the Trump calls. You don't get anything from them really, apart from very broad brush, because they don't like to look like they're leaking those calls because Trump does not like it. But you can get a sense of this frenetic work happening in the background. I think that's actually really important because if Britain and France don't manage to sort of manoeuvre this and get this done quickly, then you can see interest sliding and Zelensky being, sidelined and forced to maybe sign an even worse deal. So they need to seize the moment.
And just a bit of an insight into the sort of frenetic nature of what's going on at the moment. When we heard Caroline Levitt tell us that the latest draft of the contract was being taken into the Oval Office, any time now, this evening, for Donald Trump to have a look at. And as you say, maybe that's moving towards a conclusion. But I say that without having any much of a clue what a conclusion might even look like. Anyway, we're watching that news conference, but here at home, let's talk a bit about Westminster politics, which is what we do most of the time, and get your thoughts on what's the word at Westminster, guys, on both sides of the House of Commons as this thing plays out. Keir Starmer, as you were saying, both of you, looks to be in a pretty good place politically, getting a good measure of support from the blue side, from the red side, and pretty much every other side. Scottish Nats the other day were giving him a certain amount of support. Behind the scenes, what are you picking up, Kate? What are they saying? Let's start with the Labour side. What's the word in and out of the cabinet?
So the there's kind of a universal agreement that Keir Starmer's played it very well. He seems to have found his kind of moment, his stature on this world stage when he was really quite wobbly and struggling domestically. So, I think everyone admits or concedes that it's been a really good week for Keir Starmer politically, and he has that unity of the other parties behind him. Now, you will get, we cast our minds back to last week when that defence spending hike was paid for by those aid budget cuts. Sure, you're going to have a bit of a wobble, but I think, no big deal. People pretty chilled about Annalisa Dodd's resignation. It sounds mean, but she was going to be out at the next reshuffle anyway. They're relaxed about that. What this bleeds into potentially is this thing on the horizon in a couple of weeks' time where Liz Kendall's going to stand up and give us her proposals for these benefits cuts, which is going to start cutting probably the rate of sickness benefits some people get. Now, they are braced for a backbench rebellion on that. They are braced for some anger and revolt and unease from Labour MPs on that. And you may start kind of being in a world where some of that opposition that you had to the aid cuts bleeds into this much meatier, much more controversial thing of welfare cuts. And will that be a bit more of a domestic problem? But I think everyone would say Keir Starmer currently really finding his feet as Prime Minister on the world stage.
Yeah, what are you putting it on? We've seen the public statements, Mikey, from Kemi Badenoch and from Ed Davey. What about around the corridors? Are people saying any different? There's a nuance to things usually.
So there's some rows emerging on the Tory side because this is all following the JD Vance comments. Yesterday morning, it was remarkable how unified everyone was in condemning JD Vance over these comments. Until Kemi Badenoch came out and said, "Oh, well, actually, he didn't say Britain, did he?" And Kemi Badenoch, big fan of JD Vance. They've met before.
Right.
I think she feels they're quite pally and doesn't want to get on the wrong side of him. And obviously JD Vance, I wasn't talking about Britain, and she believes him, wants to give him the benefit of the doubt. Suddenly a text message goes round from the whips to Tory MPs saying, maybe it's best not to tweet immediately what your thoughts are on matters of such global importance. And everyone's been super quiet since then.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it was raised in Shadow Cabinet yesterday morning, so I had a text from someone who shall obviously remain nameless, and they said that Kemi had slapped down, I think it was Alicia in Shad Cab, for she'd come out of the weekend saying the Trump state visit should be cancelled in the wake of the Ukraine stuff. Now, what Kemi's trying to do here is impose some discipline, but obviously she, on her party, and kind of to say you cannot comment on these global affairs without putting it past us first. Two problems with that, really. The story, Kemi's kind of out of step with many of the people around her, so they're just not on the same page. Her comments don't reflect Cartledge's, the shadow defence sector.
Who's more hawkish on this?
Who's much more hawkish, or most of her parliamentary party. I mean, Robert Jenrick too. But also, it's her trying to, I think, stamp her authority, get her kind of rabble a bit more in a row. I mean, there's not many of them. What is it? 100 odd. But they're quite freewheeling. They do not have that kind of central grip that the Conservative Party historically always had.
Yes.
And Kemi's really struggling with this. Kind of not the most... maybe lacking a bit in authority, even as leader of the opposition.
Yeah.
So I think there's two things at play there. They're on slightly different pages in what they want to say, and it's also Kemi trying to control this rump of a Conservative Party who are really still freewheeling.
Yeah, I love that expression, get your rabble together. And meanwhile, Nigel Farage, I mean, I think you were saying earlier on you thought they were pretty much all over the place. Is that a fair summary, Mikey?
He's not had a good week. It took him too long to come out and say anything about the Zelensky meeting, and when he did, a lot of people said it was quite lily-livered. He hasn't been greatly critical of JD Vance, and I think you can see that I believe there was a YouGov poll that came out just before we came on air, which shows Nigel Farage's personal approval rating going down
significantly,
relatively significantly.
What about the party?
The party not so much, but his approval within Party supporters going down. Keir Starmer's going up, still within the margin of error, but going up nonetheless. And Donald Trump's personal approval rating in the UK going from something like -51 to -65 or something like that.
Right.
Really plummeting.
Yeah, and when you're Nigel Farage and you've made such play of being, Donald Trump's best mate in the UK, that's not very happy either. And you mentioned the rank and file of the Reform Party. They are pretty sceptical about all of this, the idea of a multinational force and so on. And you don't get the idea that Nigel Farage wants to get on the wrong side of that argument with the wider British public.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's been a tricky week for Nigel. That's definitely true. And it's interesting because this is what Labour would say was his Achilles heel, potentially Ukraine. And we're starting to see that difficulty play out already.
All right, got to leave it there. Kate and Mikey, thanks so much for joining us. Thank you for listening. Our producer today was Ollie Cole and Angus Mitchell. Our technical operator, Isaac Marley. I'm going to be back here tomorrow at 4. What will we be talking about then? Kate Borsay, what's she going to be talking about next? We're going to find out in a minute here on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
Thanks, John. Have a great evening. It's 7 o'clock. This is Kate Borsay and the Evening Edition.